So starting off with something light and not so serious, who is your favorite woman hero or inspiration that you look up to, or excluding family?
Excluding family?
Mm-hmm.
Two people come quickly to mind. One is pastor of our church at Highland Presbyterian Church, is a very, very skilled and capable leader and pastor.
Mm-hmm.
I am early on seminary trained, and many, many years ago, and I recognize a capable person who's a preacher and a leader, and
Mm-hmm.
Cynthia Campbell is that person. You're talking to me 6 days before the presidential election,
Mm-hmm.
and I happen to be among those persons who wishes Hillary Clinton was just a little more open and a little more spontaneous. But in terms of my perception of her faithfulness to public service, her basic integrity in public service, is significant. So I admire her willingness to step out and to put herself on the line. So I would say that she is nationally, internationally, and of course Michelle Obama is also, I think, a very effective communicator, and has provided some significant leadership for the country as a first lady.
Mm-hmm. And then before college, what career did you have in mind?
Well, it's actually a couple. I was raised, had an uncle who was a funeral director, and so for a season I thought maybe I might be a funeral director, just because I had worked as a teenager in a funeral home, and had kind of a basic human sympathy and an interest and willingness to work with people. I think I also imagined that I might become a physician. Clearly, I did not have that part of my brain that does physics and chemistry well developed, I think. And so early on, I think I probably gave that up. And then I always fantasized, frankly, about being involved in politics. I mean, as a 13-year-old, I memorized the presidential oath of office.
And then, did you feel confident in your academic college career, and what obstacles or situations did you experience?
My journey through college was somewhat tortured. I was in high school, and I should have mentioned that. Later in high school, I determined that I wanted to be a Methodist minister, and so I was raised in the Methodist Church, and so I went to a Methodist college in Owensboro, and did not have frankly the maturity to be a good student, and I learned. I was curious. I wasn't stupid, but I was just not focused, and the same continued into kind of a circuitous route to a couple of seminaries in the Methodist. One early on, I went from college to a seminary in Boston, and then kind of had some personal doubts about religion, and so I kind of floundered around with that and zigzagged around. So in terms of academic achievement, I had not been very successful, frankly. And then frankly, I got married and kind of had additional structure to my life. And I became a good student in seminary, my last seminary, and an effective student. Came back and pastored. I was also a pastor without full seminary credentials here in Jefferson County, and was pretty successful at that. And but more importantly, became a decent student, an effective student, and then determined that I did not want to spend my whole life as a Methodist minister, so I came here for a master's in history, where I was decently successful, and ended up getting a PhD in American history at UK. So the question was, had something to do with my academic achievements. The answer is, later in my career, I became a decent student and an effective student, I think. But it was a journey getting there.
What ratio of males to females were in your college courses, and did you feel like both genders were equally represented in the classes that you took?
In college, remember, I think the thing we ought to say is college for me is 1957 to 1960. So it's it's 60 years ago, and almost 60 years ago. So I went to a liberal arts college, Methodist related, and the ratio of men to women was about, I don't remember it being lopsided one way or the other. As to the role of women, I'm sure I don't remember it as being male dominated, but many of the males that were in my circle were aspiring Methodist ministers, male Methodist ministers. We didn't have women Methodist ministers in those days. And so I'm sure that in that culture, in that setting, probably males stuck out as a dominant gender. But on the other hand, I knew women for whom I had significant respect, and a goodly number of women, and who were very capable. I don't remember ever being consciously dismissive of women because they didn't seem to live up as far as leadership or being articulate or capable.
How do you think your professors would have answered this question? What do you think about Mr. Owen?
My professors? For most of my academic career, they would have said, that kid really has potential, but he's got a long way to go.
And then, did you have any female professors?
Maybe two, not many. In the 1950s, not many. And I think that would have also continued actually through all of my seminary career and graduate career. There were a couple of women. When I was at U of L, I did have some women professors. When I was working on the master's, a couple. And then when I was working on the PhD, I never had a woman professor. There was a woman, a very capable woman, in the history department at U of K, but I did not have her.
How would you describe your journey to your current position or profession now?
Lucky. I ended up, after being a Methodist pastor, and throwing myself ultimately on the world job market to become a professor of history with a PhD. I never got a job doing that full time. I instead became an archivist, where I certainly needed a master's, probably didn't need a PhD that I finally ended up earning. But I've just been fortunate to do what I've been able to do. I became a decent archivist and a very successful community historian, and have been doing that since 1975. And am just grateful that I ended up doing something that I enjoy so much. That role became a political base, and so 23 of the 27 years since 1990 until the end of this year, 2016, 23 of those years I've been have a 25-hour or so part-time job, being a council member or a predecessor before that, member of the Board of Aldermen. And I've enjoyed that work too. So I mean, I just feel very lucky, very fortunate to have been able to do roles that I aspired to and been successful.
Did you receive help while on your journey to your present position by anyone, such as a mentor, a parent, a counselor?
Oh, there have always been people who were significant. In my last seminary, there was a homiletics professor who believed in me and certainly shepherded me. In graduate school, there were professors that also took me under their arm, and so yeah, I've always had people who, my grandfather, he was for me, whether I was right or wrong, and that's important, people who believe in you. So I'm absolutely have had people who were mentors, guides, supporters that have just believed in me. Yeah.
And then, are you confident in your job now? Do you feel like there's fair treatment between you and the opposite sex in your current career?
Well, that's interesting. It depends on which career, which job, since I have two jobs. But here in the Archives and Special Collections, interestingly enough, I'm going to do a quick number, but it could be as many as 10, perhaps 11 female colleagues, and I'm the only male.
Oh, wow.
In the Metro Council, it's interesting, I've always had a female aide who is the backbone of my operation, but it has been, I choose that person, and for whatever reason, I've never chosen a male. But on the council, we have some real diversity. There are 26 of us, and I don't have a quick number, but I would say of the 26 on both sides of the aisle, there are at least 10 who are female.
And then, what are some of your future plans and goals in life?
To make it to sunset. I hope I have a goodly number of years left. I've got plenty to do. My head is full of continuing to do some 1-hour history videos. I've done 6. I've got a 7th in the backpack. I'd like to get back to doing a feature on video, a television or a radio feature. For 20 years I did a little 120-second feature on public radio here locally on local history. I want to try to use some innovative technologies to do local history. It always helps if there's a way to make a little extra coin using local history. So I don't know what those might be, but something online by subscription, I have no idea, but I'm absolutely open to that kind of thing. I'm doing some writing, but I probably am not a skillful writer, and I think I write clearly, but as far as doing a major book on neighborhood or Louisville history, I would guess I won't do that, but you never know. Certainly videos and radio I can do and enjoy doing that. So I feel like I've got a lot of stuff that I want to do. I'm caught, frankly, as to how much I sometimes fantasize that I still want to be involved in public policy issues and have a blog or some means of, I do Twitter, but my tweets are very, very short, regular announcements about what I'm going to do as an elected person. So my Twitter role either is going to have to change, but I'm kind of uneasy about my successor. My successor deserves not to have me run around expressing public policy opinions, especially local public policy opinions. So I think of myself as wanting to do history, local history, in even more formats and more intensely than I've been able to do while I had 2 jobs. But on the other hand, I still have some interest in public policy, recycling, public transportation, all of those kinds of things, many other issues. So I don't know. I haven't figured out my role there, but I've got to get with it because January 1st is coming.
And then, do you have any advice to your high school self and to other young adults?
Oh, that's kind of a painful and tortured question, only because what I'm troubled about is, at least in the 1960s and into the 70s, as a flounderer, there were opportunities for me to reimagine myself. So if I was a foul up, there were graces in the systems that allowed me to recover. Somehow or another, I'm fearful that somehow or another you got to be up and at 'em and fully mature and fully ready to go in a highly competitive world and a highly competitive atmosphere, and that there aren't opportunities to reimagine yourself. So what am I supposed to do? Tell a 17-year-old that they need to be focused, competitive, somber, determined, successful, ready with all of the college applications and all of the resumes and all of the internships and all of the opportunities, so that they can break the bank or break it open when they're 22 years of age? For me to be that person looking back on a 17-year-old is a little bit hypocritical. But what worries me is that my time was more yielding, and that this time is more unyielding. And that worries me, because frankly, I just think there are some folks that just ain't going to be able to get with it, like myself, until I got some years under me. And I was able to recover, and I'm not bragging, excuse me. I'm doing I think I developed that far enough. I mean, I just, your question was advice to a high schooler, and you know, this is a terrible cliche, but I don't know how to find your passion, but I'm grateful I found mine. And, I know the point I was making. When I say that I have been successful or effective, I understand how relative that means, compared to what or to whom, you know. And I'm not bragging that I have been some kind of grand achiever, but I'm telling you, I have managed to have several facets of my life that have brought me significant satisfaction, and for which I feel that I am adequately competent. And that's the gratitude that I'm expressing. I'm not expressing that somehow or another I'm a real wing-dinger at all. I don't mean that, but I have been lucky enough. I kind of put it in a spiritual context and say my posture in life is gratitude. Gratitude for my health, gratitude for the brain that still works, gratitude for the things I've slipped and fallen in and felt adequately successful at, and so I have a significant leaning toward gratitude.
And then I have there's 5 questions that I have that, because I asked the men on the interview a different set of questions than I asked the women. They're similar, but they're still different. And then I have 5 of the same questions that I asked both male and females. So the first one is, according to Merriam-Webster, feminism is the belief that men and women should have equal rights and opportunities. Do you agree with this definition? Why or why not?
I mean, again, it's going to sound like a cliche, but um, um, I have a daughter, I have granddaughters, and I want for them every 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 door that's open to a man would be open to them. So if that's what feminism is, I believe in it. I married a woman who is focused, a get-her-done kind of person, a capable get-her-done kind of person, on whom I have depended significantly. She's actually the person that made me possible, because she gave me the flexibility to zig and zag, and for which I have significant gratitude. So, and she had a successful career in her own right. She's retired now, but I don't think, famous last words, but I don't think I'm intimidated by strong women. I think I'm appreciative of strong women.
And then, do you consider yourself a feminist?
Well, yeah, to the extent that I feel like even in my job currently here, with a ratio of 10 women colleagues to me, I look to them equally and capably, and my boss is a woman, and I find her very supportive, and so yes, I do feel I would call myself a feminist. Never have before, but in that setting, yes.
And then, do you feel like the representation of women in government is particularly low in the U.S.? Why or why not? And do you know what percentage of women make up the U.S. politics?
No, I don't know the percentage. There are a goodly number of women on the Metro Council. It is not an equal number. I have not done the math, and I should have before you came, but I believe it's somewhere in the ratio of, it's a balance, or it's a number of about 10 perhaps to 16. I'm not positive of that. After we're done and the tapes shut down, I'll count it up. But overall, I think it's still an uphill battle for a woman in politics. I think it's a hard road to hoe, and I think it's still hard for men, some men, not to believe that a forceful, articulate woman isn't being pushy.
Yeah. And then I have just a few facts about it. So women make up 51% of the population, but we only make up 17% of the government. And then the U.S. ranks 90th in the world for percentage of women in its national legislature, with Rwanda being number 1, and they have 49% of their government is made up of women. And then if the U.S. stays at this exact rate of like 17% of our government being made up of women, it will take 500 years for us to catch up and be equally represented in Congress.
That's interesting. That's interesting, yeah.
And then, in what ways do you think society can better motivate women and girls to actively participate in leadership roles in our society?
I have always been impressed. I have not been particularly strong in this area myself, but I mentioned of someone like Melissa Mershon, who was on the old Board of Aldermen with me, and I thought was on a mayoral track. Turns out she chose to run for sheriff, and in a painful election crashed and burned, and probably damaged her brand in local politics enough that she's never chosen to run again. And I would guess that and I think the community is weaker for that. But she seemed to me to have been a sterling monitor for young people generally, and for young women specifically. She brought them in. She encouraged them. She created visions in their mind. And I think really the key is a belief that you can do it. and that, but then comes the opportunities. If there aren't internships, if there are not mentors, if there are not, all of those things are very, very important. I'm not sure for a moment I've been particularly strong in that regard, but I think that's and then just the simple belief that you can do it, and it's a rancorous job. I mean, just look at political ads this week, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'm thinking of a woman in southern Indiana like Shelley Yoder, for instance. Now she's fighting back with some negative ads against her opponent. I don't know her personally. I only see her, but you know, they've turned her into just a diabolic figure. So it's a hard job. I mean, it's a job. It's a contact sport, and I think I guess the thread I'm pulling here is that contact sport certainly doesn't exclude women, but I really think that men and women both who get into this business have to have something of a veneer to keep from just getting your feelings hurt so badly that you that you wander off. You know, I mean, geez, it's rough out there, and it's not getting any better.
And then, if this was your project and you had to create an art piece that represents women in government, how do you think you would best represent that? This one's kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have anything to contribute to that. I'm just trying to think of visually communicating. I think what I would want to do is to create some kind of three-dimensional linear series of images that would be historical in nature. And so the early fighters for the vote, the early fighters for suffrage, the early political figures, the early leading women who did step out, and then so it would be sort of a shaped with a point. It would be three-dimensional, and it would be the past, the coming toward you past, and then the blossoming into young women who have not served but who have the potential to serve, and they would be depicted across the broader piece of the arrow coming out.
That sounds interesting. And that concludes, those are all my questions on the paper, but thank you so much.
Yes, indeedy.
I learned a lot from you.
Good, good.